Hey. This is Mike Ramos from the Your Car Dealer Bond. Thanking you guys for tuning in for another episode of the Your Car Dealer Podcast. Talking about all things for used car dealers in 2019, getting awfully close to 2020. And still trying to give you guys the best content possible for you guys really building a thriving, successful used car dealer business, whether wholesale, retail, or even if you're auto brokering. Really trying to give you guys the best practices, best processes, thought, strategies, plans of attack, if you will. Really trying to hit the stuff that you guys are looking for. And most oftentimes, I'd say about 80% at least of the folks that I've engaged with at this point that have found our podcast have really found it in a way, and they're saying some things like, man, this is really I'm new in business. I'm just getting licensed. I just finished the licensing process. I just got licensed a year ago. So a lot of times we're going to hit on content that might be slightly more geared towards the newer dealer, not necessarily the dealer that's been in business 20 years. You'd be surprised, a lot of the dealers that have been in business 20 years aren't listening to podcasts nearly as much also. So interesting confluence of information there. But what I wanted to kind of get into this week was environment, kind of understanding your environment and understanding it's a real simple thing. It's a real simple concept. I think it's overlooked quite a bit. Myself, I overlook it, I think, more often than not. I think my competitors overlook it. I think your competitors overlook it. I even think that maybe at times we overlook it, you included. Overlook the environment. There's certain elements of your environment you really can and you cannot control. I think it's a good idea to maybe focus on the ones that you can control, of course, and really, really exceedingly focus a lot of your energy there, because the stuff that you cannot control, you have no ability to alter, modify. It just doesn't make as much sense to really put a lot of your thought process and energy into those directions. But for what it's worth, really, I would take a step back and look at your environment. Are you maximizing your environment for what it is? Some of you guys, and I'm guilty of this. I had my office set up a very certain way. It was probably very similar to what guys would normally do, in their offices. And it was very bland. It was very straightforward. It was sterile. And then I asked my wife one day, why don't you go to the office? Check it out. Let me know what you think. Why don't you change some things around, or do whatever you would do, you just walking into this place. And I wasn't even there with her that day. I said, you go. I'm not going to be there for another couple days. I'll just be surprised with whatever you do. Do whatever you want, though. So she had free reign. She sure took advantage of it and created a slightly different space. It did promote some different concepts and ideas in my brain of what we could now do with the office. And slowly but surely, we've started to evolve it into what I envision to be probably almost like a little small studio, where we'll end up really cutting a lot more content in the future there. So kind of using the space in a different way, our environment that I was normally used to seeing a very specific way, that got tilted on its head. And that's where I first started kind of getting, you guys might have caught that episode on the pattern disrupt a few months ago, and this kind of almost is the same concept. Is you've got this very specific pattern that you're already accustomed to. You've got this environment that you're very accustomed to. And a lot of times you think, you function, you have, all these things kind of going in the same exact direction. You're not going to necessarily think differently. You're not necessarily going to have any different creative thoughts about certain things and about ways to solve problems when you kind of get caught up into the same exact routine and environment. Recently, I work a lot of times. I mean, I'm almost never in my office, my away from home office. I usually would work at my home office where my wife also works. And in that office, I have a very specific setup. I have 3 monitors. I've got a desk setup and configuration that I'm very accustomed to. And it was funny because I don't even know why I do know why. Originally, it was because my desktop had started to, something was wrong with it. That part needed to be replaced in it. So I got that off to my IT guys, and in the meantime, I had to use my desktop, my laptop. So I'm thinking, well, it's the start of summer. Let me take this bad boy out in the morning, in the wee hours of the morning, and late at night, especially because when I'm, I just needed a change of environment, and while I'm typing and, listening to podcasts and trying to cut content and all this stuff, I kind of just wanted to, sometimes I want to listen to something and not wake up the rest of the house if it's 3 a.m, or 5 a.m, or whatever it is. And so a lot of times I would either stay up super late or wake up super early to get into these times where I've got a few minutes away from an emails. I don't have to respond to anybody, and I really kind of needed to get a jump on the next day. So I would do this, but I would take my laptop outside, and I ended up setting up a couple of monitors out there, and it turned out, oh my gosh, I got a lot of work done. Took a couple extra minutes to kind of set it up and tear it down at the end of the day when I was done with it, but it did give me some fresh perspective on things to work in an outdoor environment, to then be hear the birds chirping, smell the fresh air. It was a completely new environment, and it kind of did some wonders for me. Just recently, now my desktop is fixed, and I thought, geez, I could go back to my old workstation, or I could reassemble a workstation. I could have 2 workstations. I'll have my laptop workstation, and then I'll have my desktop workstation in my office. So then I have 2 totally separate environments. So when I want to think a certain way, I do something. I go to maybe my desktop. When I want to become a little more creative, I might go to my laptop, where I'm completely separated. I'm segregated from my wife in a different part of the office. I might need a few extra minutes to myself to gather my thoughts. All that to say that as I float back and forth through these different environments, even where I'm working, this is in the exact same house. I'm just floating to a different room, where I have a workstation set up, and I can tell you it makes a little more difference than you would give it credit for, I think, on the surface. So I say all that to say that really start to look at your environments. You guys are looking for, you guys are hitting the wall in certain areas. I notice this to be a good method when I'm having to do stuff that I don't necessarily like to do. I try to mix 2 different things, one that I like doing and one that I don't like doing. So it might be like even something as simple as sometimes I get into a weird mood where talking to people is not necessarily what I want to do. I get more insulated at times. I get slightly more introverted at different times, just depending on different. I don't even necessarily know why. Just at different times, I'm less talkative, and I want to be a little bit more to myself. And at those times, if I still have to make calls, but I don't necessarily want to, I'll mix that with something else that I do like doing. Like, I'll go inside my pool and make those calls. I love being inside my pool. Don't necessarily like having to make the calls at the time where I'm feeling introverted. So the idea is breaking up the monotony of where you guys are usually doing your stuff. If you guys are usually used to having to make calls and don't necessarily like to make calls, there's not a lot of used car dealers that are more introverted, but to the extent that you guys are, take a walk. Sometimes that, if you like walking, sometimes that'll help break up your mind and take your mind off of it and kind of put the focus in a different area. Then you can just kind of do you, so to speak. Slightly other things, slightly different concepts of how to use your environment, putting up different things, different colors, of course. I'm not going to get into a lot of that kind of stuff, but different pictures I've noticed, even slightly different screensavers kind of sometimes have a tendency to have a different effect. But I do notice that visually if visually things are looking sharp around in my environment, I operate a little differently. I do notice that. And I do notice that if I don't like doing something, a lot of times it's a lot better to do that thing that I'm not a real big fan of in a different environment or mixed with something that I'm really a big fan of. So for what it's worth, it's a concept. Hopefully you guys are able to utilize it. Hopefully it means something to you guys. Hopefully it's something you guys can end up leveraging to your benefit, switching up the environments, trying to maximize that utilization of your environment, switching things up to kind of push yourself to get a little more creative or to go at your problems in a slightly different way.